Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Brian Schramsky. He's the managing partner of federal government and public safety for Verizon Wireless. Lamont Copeland is the managing director of federal solutions architecture for the Verizon Business Group, and Scott Anderson, a distinguished architect at Verizon Federal. Good to have you all with us. And I want to talk about modernization and the evolution of the network, future network strategies. What are the best objectives as federal agencies look to move their networks to the next generation of technology and capability? What's the underlying driver that they should be trying to get to with this effort?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that are underpinning what they need to do with the modernization of their networks is looking at a couple things of like, with the rapid change of technology, rapid change of everything that's being introduced to service different mission sets. You got to look at what the infrastructure that is there today. There's a lot of aging infrastructure that the government has to start working through and getting on so that they can bring in a lot of these latest technologies to meet more of the mission set that they're trying to solve for, whether it's something with public safety and trying to protect the nation, whether it's something with the military to try to make sure they have a lot of situational awareness, or anything in between, even with the healthcare side and making sure that we're providing the proper benefits and things to the nation. To be able to leverage all this technology, a lot of the infrastructure needs to be looked at, a lot of the technology needs to be reviewed, and then understanding of how to then build that plan to evolve the technology itself appropriately. And there's a lot more needs with this data, as I'm saying here. There's a lot of things that require a lot of data, a lot of information understanding, a lot of dissemination of data everywhere across their enterprise, both inside of the agencies themselves, and then how they then reach to some of the data centers that they go get this data from. So a lot of it's based on the mission focus on how do you then leverage a lot of this technology to get to the data. And then finally, it's the mobility of our community. We are still working through COVID and all those things, but we're still very remote. We got remote workers, we got people that are working at the borders, we got people that are working inside of different facilities, and they need to be able to have the ability to touch this data at any moment in time to be able to answer questions or do their day-to-day jobs. So the evolution of technology, evolution of these infrastructures need to be taken into consideration on how do you, one, meet the mission set, two, manage mobility, and then three, just get the right things in place to be able to support the day-to-day activities so the government is working through.
Yeah, it sounds like with all of these mobile users and cloud instances and data storage, the topologies have really changed a lot. And so you have to update them to update your network because of that locational aspect of it. Fair to say?
Yes, that is correct.
That's very fair. Sorry, Lamont. That's very fair to say, Tom. I mean, that is what's going on right now. As Lamont talked about, the government agencies are looking at what they have. In many cases, they haven't changed things, but neither have commercial companies. The networks that were designed in the 90s and the 2000s as Tootsie Pops, right? You got a hard outer shell and you got a soft, gooey center. Well, somebody took that soft, gooey center of their Tootsie Pops and moved it out to the cloud. And that really changes how you do security. That changes how you do routing. That changes how you actually implement that new network of the future. And Lamont also mentioned, as we kind of head down this path, it's all about how do we help the customer get to where they need to be. They are delivering their mission, and our mission is to help them deliver it.
All right. So given these different objectives, greater service of mobile clients, getting to the data, supporting the new types of digital related missions or digitally based missions, what does the emerging network start to look like? Give us a sense of what its components and technologies are that make it up.
Yeah, so I'll address that one there, Tom, and building off of the great comments made by Lamont and Scott. So one that's near and dear to our heart, if we look at something like 5G, right? And we'll take something as simple as drones, right? We all know that drones are here. They've been here for a while, as we watched, unfortunately, during the first Gulf War, right? And using drone technologies. But what we're going to see in terms of drones is actually more mainstream, right? And we're starting to build off of those foundations as the modernization process continues, things like cloud technology, right? So if we look at something like a drone, one of the biggest issues with a drone, we're talking about low aerial drones, is keeping a drone up in the air for a very long time, right? So the more weight that you put to a drone, the less uptime do you have in the drone in terms of fly time, right? So how do you offload weight, right? Well, you'd start taking things like compute off of the drone, right? You'd start taking battery weight off of there. How are you going to do that? Well, if I don't have to do the compute on the drone and I can put that in the cloud, and I can then actually do what is called edge computing or mobile edge computing, extending that cloud closer to that particular drone, right? I start to lessen the weight. I don't need as much battery time, or I can actually supplement the battery time where the compute storage or that CPU that was on the drone is now replaced by a bigger battery, and I can keep the drone up and running, right? And then when you start bringing in technology like 5G and advanced communication in terms of high-speed data, you start going out of line of sight. So you can start bringing technology like AR, VR, where you have the pilot, he or she is a remote area. They put on a pair of goggles and they could actually fly the drone in real time, right? Unlike doing, pre-static waypoints to go from point A to point B and back, right? Well, I have other vectors, right? I want to now go to point C. I want to go to point D, right? And when we start looking at where drones will start coming to play and using technologies like mobile edge computing and 5G, it's things like the VA, right? The ability to deliver medication to veterans, right? It could be even homeless veterans in some cases, right? Or residents. You start looking at search and rescue, obviously with our hurricane efforts down in Yeon, right? Where, I don't have so many helicopters, right? Can I actually have low aerial drones actually surveil areas that are remote, a barrier island or inside of an infrastructure, right? Maybe it's a large garage, right? I don't want to send men and women into those places. I'd rather say a drone in there and actually do a video surveillance before I actually put that team in there, right? So I think that's where I get really excited when you start seeing this technology. And we see a lot of this for 5G beyond a smartphone, beyond a tablet. It's going to take, I would say, in my mind, where we seen 10 years ago, IoT was the buzzword. I start thinking like IoT 2.0, right? Actually ingesting technology as mobility has matured, as cloud has matured, is really pushing at the edge. And you can really see it as something simple as a drone and keeping the uptime greater just by lessening the payload of that particular drone.
So the implication is that the 5G as an outdoor broadband type of service is ubiquitous now that can enable these types of applications?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. In some cases, we're doing connected drones on 4G. It only gets better with 5G technology and the more capabilities that you have.
Right. And I guess, imagery can move with greater speed and larger objects of software, I guess you might.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, search and rescue, right? So if you want to go in a vast large area and think about it, right? You can cover a very large area. You could actually have 20, 30 drones autonomously flying, right? And then they're actually searching. And when something happens, right, there's a quick response. They're actually at object detection. Right. And then we actually recalibrate and communicate to all those drones to say, hey, let's do a wide area circle here and start zooming in. Right. And then relaying that information. Right. That's going to unlock a lot of different technology, especially like if you look at something like police departments. We're very excited. We're actually going to the IACP conference this weekend. And, a lot of departments don't have a helicopter unit. Right. I was up with Boston PD. They don't have a helicopter unit. Right. But imagine actually having a drone program that actually gives more access, not just to fire and EMS, but other public health or forest service, or search and rescue. It unlocks a lot of different things of potential for public safety as well as government agencies.
And let me ask you also, just to continue for a moment on the 5G question, and any of you can maybe answer this, and that is, what about the idea of backhaul that is wireless as opposed to having dedicated lines or fiber optic and this kind of thing? We're hearing more and more, the movement of large data sets around, or the synchronizing of data that may not necessarily need land and physical cabling.
Correct. Yeah, I'll answer that one, and I'll turn it to Lamont to add some of the color commentary. But there is actually a huge need, right? Where traditionally we've gone from what we call wireless backup or fixed wireless access, using cellular technology to be, if the primary goes down, right, handing off to the backup of a cellular connection out there, be a 3G, 4G, and now 5G. Now as 5G and actually as 4G has evolved over the last couple of years, we're actually seeing more primary connections, right? Actually using this technology. And I think where it gets exciting is actually offering more digital services to the citizens by using this technology, right? So think about having, example would be, and Lamont mentioned COVID, right? How do I actually have drive-through testing or vaccination sites, right? Where I want to do this in a parking lot, I set up a tent, right? How am I getting connectivity there, recording all the information? You could do that, right? By using 4G and 5G technology. So I can do real-time analytics in terms of positive, negative tests. I can actually do real-time data scanning information right there, doing image collection of the forms, right? As well as vaccination cards, which unlocks a lot of different capabilities that you have, or even kiosk, right? We see this today, like having kiosks for government services, right? If you're trying to get certain paperwork or submit things in there, the office is closed, the office could actually stay up 24/7, similar to what ATM machines have done the last 30, 40 years. You could actually have those more digital services, and those are powered by actually these connections. And where we tie to modernization is the government can actually put these kiosks or other locations in non-government locations, right? Because they can actually have that connection locked down to their network using things like Zero Trust, that they manage those connections and those devices and actually have greater outreach to the citizen community.
Lamont, final word before we break here.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of other aspects too with it, using the FWA and wireless in place. Because if you take it into the standpoint of the enterprises and what's happening inside of these buildings, you tie that into an SD-WAN technology to be able to then service those applications to be able to support that. So now you have a building which has the ability to use wireless and wireline either as a primary or a secondary connection, depending on the what the need of the building is. And you're able to leverage and support the performance of that application, support the data that's coming back and forth between what's happening with your mission sets and what's happening with how you're supporting the citizens, as Brian is saying there. So there's different ways of leveraging that technology to be able to provide a way of managing application performance, but also then too a way to be able to control costs too as well with the wireless line coming in. So there are a multitude of ways that you can use that. Also, too, you can use it in instances where we know that there's a lot of changes right now with in the industry to remove TDM lines and TDM services there. Wireless is a very good way to be able to come in, for example, to replace a lot of these POTS lines, to be able to take out POTS lines and so you don't have to go in and trench in or build into some of these older buildings, leverage wireless to come in and provide that same service. And then be able to leverage that newer technology to be able to support whatever's happening, whether it's an elevator that uses a POTS line or a telephone line. So a lot of different aspects.
Well, some really great use cases here, some good concrete stuff, but we're going to take a short break. My guests today are Lamont Copeland. He's the Managing Director of Federal Solutions Architecture for the Verizon Business Group. Brian Chomsky is the Managing Partner of Federal Government and Public Safety for Verizon Wireless. And Scott Anderson is the Distinguished Architect at Verizon Federal. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This is Federal Insights, Infrastructure Evolution, sponsored by Verizon here on Federal News Network.